The wind doesn't ask permission, it just arrives. And when it does, it carries a cold your body has never prepared for, a cold that doesn't ease by midday, doesn't break by nightfall, and doesn't lift for weeks. This is your world. You are somewhere in Central Europe, roughly 20,000 years ago, and the last glacial maximum is at its peak. The ice sheets that cover northern Europe extend so far south that the land you're standing on looks nothing like what it will become. There are no forests here, no rolling green hills, just open, frozen steppes stretching in every direction, and a wind that punishes everything in its path. And yet, somehow you survive, not just for a season, not just for a year. For thousands of generations, your ancestors did exactly that, lived, hunted, raised children, and built something resembling a life inside the harshest climate the Earth has produced in the last 2 million years. How? Let's find out. The Last Glacial Maximum, or LGM, is the period when the ice sheets were at their greatest extent, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. Temperatures in parts of Europe were between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius colder than today. Sea levels were around 120 meters lower. Because so much of the world's water was locked into ice, Britain was connected to mainland Europe by a land bridge. What is now the English Channel was dry tundra. The Mediterranean was smaller. The world looked different at its bones. This is not a hypothetical disaster. It is what happened. And your ancestors walked right through it. The first thing you need to understand is shelter, not the romantic version. Not the cozy cave with a crackling fire that lives in every documentary. The real version. Most of the cave systems archaeologists have excavated across France, Spain, and Central Europe show signs of only occasional habitation. Caves were useful. Yes, they blocked wind, they held heat better than open air, and their walls became the canvas for some of the most extraordinary art your species has ever produced. From the 36,000-year-old paintings at Chauvet Cave in southern France, to the ochre handprints at El Castillo in Spain. But caves were not the default. They were not everywhere, and they were not always safe. Across the vast open steppe where no caves existed, your ancestors built. The excavations at Mezhirich in Ukraine, dated to around 15,000 years ago, revealed something extraordinary. A series of structures built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Not bones scavenged randomly, arranged deliberately, skulls stacked at the base, long femurs interlocked like timber, jawbones placed in repeating chevron patterns. These were engineered structures, roofed with hides, insulated from the inside with moss and grass, capable of maintaining a livable temperature, even when the air outside was far below freezing. The people who built them were not desperate. They were not scrambling. They were solving a problem with the materials the steppe gave them, and they solved it well enough to survive multiple generations in the same location. Fire was the other half of that equation, and fire, in an environment where wood was scarce, required problem-solving your modern brain tends to underestimate. Archaeologist Wil Roebroeks and his colleagues published research in 2012 confirming that Neanderthals, your close relatives, were managing fire well before 400,000 years ago. By the time your direct ancestors reached Ice Age Europe, fire-making was not a recent skill. It was ancient and deeply practiced. On the open steppe, when wood was not available, your ancestors burned bone. Fat-soaked mammoth or horse bone, it turns out, burned slowly and hot. Researchers studying hearth sites from the LGM period have found concentrations of burned bone that confirm this was not accidental, it was deliberate fuel management. You burned what the land gave you, and the land gave you carcasses, which brings us to food, and this is where the picture gets complicated in ways that should genuinely surprise you. When people imagine Ice Age nutrition, they often picture near starvation, a desperate, exhausting scramble for whatever wasn't frozen. The reality is nearly the opposite. The steppe tundra environment of Ice Age Europe was, in terms of large animal biomass, extraordinarily rich. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, cave lions, cave bears, steppe bison, wild horses, giant deer. The megafauna of the LGM represented a caloric abundance modern Europe simply does not have. Your ancestors were not living in a barren wasteland. They were living inside what ecologist Paul Martin described as a Pleistocene megafauna ecosystem, a world where protein-rich, fat-dense animals moved in vast herds across the landscape. The evidence from bone assemblages at sites like Solutré in France, where the skeletal remains of an estimated 100 Susan horses have been excavated over decades, suggests that hunting was not occasional. It was systematic, organized, strategic. Your ancestors understood animal behavior. They read migration routes. They knew where herds would be in winter, where they would water in the brief, unfrozen months, where the terrain funneled them into kill zones. Ecoremnantal archaeology and analysis of Gravettian and Solutrean projectile technology. The carefully pressure-flaked points your ancestors were producing 22,000 years ago confirms that these were not crude weapons. They were precision instruments, and the people wielding them were experts, but hunting alone was not enough. Fat was the currency of survival in the Ice Age, and your ancestors knew it. Lean protein without fat. What modern nutritionists call rabbit starvation is actually dangerous. Your body cannot process too much lean protein without adequate fat, and protein without fat in a cold environment accelerates heat loss. Your ancestors preferentially targeted the fattest animals, the ones with the densest marrow, the thickest subcutaneous fat, and they processed carcasses with extraordinary efficiency. Long bones were cracked open for marrow. Skulls were processed for brain fat. Nothing was wasted. Across dozens of Ice Age sites, archaeologists have found evidence of large-scale communal processing, multiple families, potentially multiple bands, working together to butcher, dry, and store large quantities of meat. Work by Olga Sofer of the University of Illinois, analyzing Gravettian sites across Eastern Europe, pointed toward a level of social complexity and coordination that contradicts the old image of isolated, desperate Ice Age families. These were not lone survivors. They were networked communities, and that network, the social fabric, the extended kinship ties, the willingness to share, may have been the single most important survival tool your ancestors had. Here is the counterintuitive twist. The Ice Age did not select primarily for the strongest individuals. It selected for the best cooperators. Think about what a harsh winter actually demands. It demands that you can rely on others when your hunt fails. It demands that someone older knows where water doesn't freeze, where the herds go in deep cold, how to read the sky before a storm. It demands that you maintain trust across distances, that the group you split from in autumn is still a group you can find and reintegrate with in spring. Cooperation, information sharing, and long-term reciprocity were not soft skills. They were hard biological requirements. The research of evolutionary anthropologist Kim Sterlny has argued that the cognitive demands of maintaining large cooperative networks, tracking who owes whom, remembering past generosities and past failures, modeling the minds of others, drove significant pressure on human social intelligence during exactly this period. The Ice Age wasn't just a physical test, it was a social one, which is why the art matters so much. The explosion of symbolic culture during the LGM, the cave paintings, the carved figurines, the personal ornaments made of shells traded hundreds of kilometers from the coast, wasn't decoration, it was communication, it was identity. The Venus figurines found across a broad arc from France to Siberia, dating to roughly 25,000 years ago, suggest a shared symbolic language across thousands of kilometers and dozens of distinct groups. These objects were the social glue of a networked Ice Age world. They said, "We are the same kind of people. We can trust each other." Your ancestors did not survive the Ice Age, despite the cold. They survived it because the cold forced them to become extraordinarily good at being human. And then, roughly 11,700 years ago, the ice retreated. The megafauna disappeared. Some hunted, some lost to climate shifts, most to a combination of both. The open steppe closed over with forest. The herds your ancestors had built their entire way of life around were gone. And the people who had survived the hardest climate in 2 million years had to adapt again. They did. You are proof of that. Here is what should stay with you. You carry Ice Age biology in a world that no longer resembles it. Your body's preference for fat and salt, your tendency to feel safer in groups, your deep need for social belonging, your instinct to read other people's faces before you trust them. These are not quirks. They are adaptations. They were written into your biology by tens of thousands of years of winters. Your conscious mind cannot imagine, but your cells remember perfectly. The wind doesn't ask permission, it just arrives. And somewhere in you, buried under everything modern life has layered on top, is a body that already knows how to answer it.